The biting Alaskan wind whipped across the vast, snow-laden landscape, carrying with it the scent of ice and the distant cries of gulls. Aiyana, an Inuit hunter in his prime, pulled his sealskin parka tighter, his breath misting in the frigid air. The sun, a pale disk in the winter sky, offered little warmth, merely illuminating the endless white expanse that stretched before him. For generations, his people had lived in harmony with this unforgiving land, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the abundance of the hunt. Today, however, a different kind of chill settled in Aiyana's bones, one not born of the weather, but of the encroaching world of the Kabluna, the white settlers. Their presence, though still scattered, was growing, bringing with it new ways, new rules, and an unsettling disregard for the ancient traditions that sustained his community. The new postmaster, Mr. Davies, was a prime example. A stern, unyielding man who saw the land as something to be conquered, not cherished. His sharp words and dismissive glances were a constant reminder of the widening chasm between their cultures. Aiyana focused on the task at hand, his snowshoes crunching softly as he moved across the frozen river. He was tracking caribou, their faint prints barely visible beneath a fresh dusting of snow. Suddenly a glint of movement near a break in the ice caught his eye. It was too unnatural, too erratic for an animal. His heart quickened. He crept closer, his harpoon held ready until the horrifying truth became clear. A small, dark figure thrashed desperately in the frigid water, a human being caught in the icy grip of the river. Without a moment's hesitation, Aiyana shed his heavy outer layers, his training kicking in. This was a life to be saved, regardless of who it belonged to. He reached the edge of the ice, the bitter cold a shocking assault, and prepared to act. The girl was barely conscious, her small frame convulsing with hypothermia as Aiyana plunged into the numbing water. The shock of the cold was immense, but his years of living in this harsh environment had hardened him. He grasped her arm, his strong grip securing her as he fought against the current and the treacherous ice. With immense effort, he pulled her lifeless form onto the solid ground of the riverbank. Her clothes were soaked and frozen, her lips blue, her breath shallow. He quickly bundled her in his spare furs, rubbing her limbs vigorously to stimulate circulation, just as his grandmother had taught him. The first signs of a weak cough, a shiver, brought a wave of relief. She was alive. As he worked, he noticed the fine details of her clothing, the delicate stitching, and a small, intricately carved locket around her neck. This was no ordinary trapper's daughter. A chilling realization dawned on him as he carefully turned her head to check for injuries. Her face, though pale and distorted by cold, was unmistakably familiar. The prominent nose, the high cheekbones. She was the spitting image of Mr. Davies, the postmaster. Aiyana's stomach clenched. The man who had shown nothing but disdain for his people, whose very presence was a source of tension in the small settlement. And now his daughter lay half dead in Aiyana's arms, a life he had just saved. The implications were immediate and complex. Returning her to her father meant facing the postmaster's unpredictable temper, perhaps even his suspicion. Leaving her was unthinkable. Aiyana's moral compass, honed by generations of communal living and respect for all life, pointed firmly towards rescue and responsibility. He lifted her carefully, her weight surprisingly light, and began the arduous journey back to his camp, the bitter wind howling a warning of the difficult path ahead. The rescued girl, a fragile bridge between two wary worlds, was now his burden and his unexpected connection. The warmth of Aiyana's igloo, though humble, was a sanctuary against the relentless cold. He laid the girl on a thick layer of furs near the central fire pit, its flames casting dancing shadows on the ice walls. His wife, Lena, a woman of quiet strength and deep wisdom, immediately set about preparing a warm broth of caribou and herbs. Their young son, Kaluta, watched with wide, curious eyes, his usual boisterous energy subdued by the presence of the unconscious stranger. Lena, without needing to be told, understood the gravity of the situation. Her people's ancient laws of hospitality extended to all, especially those in dire need. As the girl slowly began to thaw, her shivering subsided, and a faint flush returned to her cheeks. Aiyana watched her, a mix of concern and apprehension churning within him. He wondered what her father's reaction would be, how the postmaster, a man so set in his ways, would respond to his daughter being saved by an Inuit. He imagined the accusations, the mistrust, yet looking at the girl's innocent, vulnerable face, he knew he had made the only choice possible. Hours later, her eyes fluttered open. They were a startling blue, wide with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, but Lena gently pressed her back down, offering a small cup of the warm broth. The girl hesitated, her gaze darting from Lena to Aiyana, her fear palpable. Aiyana spoke in a low, calming voice, using the few English words he knew, explaining that she was safe, that they had rescued her. He pointed to himself. Aiyana. Then to Lena. Lena. Her fear slowly began to recede, replaced by a dawning comprehension. She looked around the igloo, at the unfamiliar tools, the furs, the smoke hole, a world utterly alien to her. It was clear she was far from her comfortable home, and the reality of her predicament was beginning to settle in. News traveled slowly but surely in the vast expanse of the Alaskan wilderness. When Mr. Davies, the postmaster, finally received word that his daughter, Elizabeth, had been found by an Inuit hunter, his relief was quickly overshadowed by a surge of anger and suspicion. He immediately set out for Aiyana's camp, his face a thundercloud of resentment. He arrived with a small group of his men, their rifles conspicuously slung over their shoulders, their expressions mirroring their leader's distrust. Aiyana met them outside the igloo, his stance firm but respectful. He led Mr. Davies to Elizabeth, who, though still weak, was sitting up, sipping broth. The reunion was fraught with unspoken tension. Elizabeth, seeing her father, burst into tears of relief, but her gaze lingered on Aiyana, a silent acknowledgement of his heroism. Mr. Davies, however, barely spared Aiyana a glance. He checked his daughter over, his questions sharp and abrupt, dismissing Lena's gentle assurances. "Why was she out there?" Mr. Davies demanded, turning his piercing gaze to Aiyana. "What were your intentions?" Aiyana, understanding the underlying accusation, explained simply, "She was in the river. I saved her." His words were few, but his eyes conveyed a quiet dignity and an unspoken challenge to the postmaster's prejudices. Mr. Davies, caught between his relief and his ingrained mistrust, struggled to respond. He grudgingly offered Aiyana a few coins, a meager payment for a life saved and a clear attempt to put distance between them. Aiyana, insulted by the gesture, refused the money with a silent shake of his head. The postmaster, taken aback, finally relented, and without a word of thanks, bundled Elizabeth into his sleigh, leaving Aiyana and his family standing in the cold, the chasm between their worlds seemingly wider than ever. The act of rescue had forged an unexpected, strained alliance, but true understanding remained elusive. Don't let this epic story end here. Hit that subscribe button and join our community for more incredible adventures. The incident with Elizabeth Davies quickly spread through the small, disparate communities of the Alaskan wilderness. Among the Inuit, Aiyana was hailed for his courage and adherence to their ancient laws of compassion. But among some of the white settlers, particularly those who shared Mr. Davies's narrow-minded views, the narrative was twisted. Whispers of suspicion circulated. Why was an Inuit hunter so far from his usual hunting grounds? What was his true motive? These insidious rumors, fueled by fear and ignorance, created a colder atmosphere than the Alaskan winter itself. Aiyana felt the change acutely. When he visited the trading post, the usual camaraderie with some of the independent trappers was replaced by wary glances. Mr. Davies, it seemed, was subtly poisoning the well, not with outright accusations, but with insinuation and a pervasive sense of mistrust. The postmaster, a man of considerable influence in the small, isolated settlements, made sure that the incident was viewed through a lens of his own prejudice, rather than as an act of pure heroism. Despite the growing animosity, Aiyana maintained his stoic demeanor. He continued his hunting, providing for his family and community, unwavering in his commitment to his way of life. Lena, however, felt the sting of the prejudice more deeply. She worried for their son, Kaluta, and the future generations who would have to navigate this increasingly hostile landscape. She saw the fear in the eyes of the white children who sometimes ventured near their camp, a fear that had not been there before. The beauty of their land, the richness of their culture, felt under siege. The act of saving a life had, paradoxically, exposed the deep-seated divisions that ran through the heart of this wild frontier, forcing Aiyana to confront not just the harsh elements, but the equally harsh realities of human bias. Days turned into weeks, and the severe winter held the land in its icy grip. Despite the prevailing tension, a flicker of something unexpected began to emerge. Elizabeth Davies, confined to her bed recovering from the ordeal, found herself haunted by the image of her rescuer. The postmaster, dismissive of Aiyana, had forbidden her from speaking of the incident, yet she couldn't shake the memory of his calm strength, his quiet determination. She knew deep down that he had saved her life without hesitation, an act of profound kindness that contrasted sharply with her father's coldness. Driven by a restless curiosity and a sense of profound gratitude, Elizabeth began to observe the Inuit from her window. She saw them move with an effortless grace across the snow, their movements purposeful, their lives seemingly intertwined with the harsh rhythms of the land. She noticed the smoke rising from Aiyana's igloo, a beacon of life in the desolate landscape. One afternoon, when her father was away at a neighboring settlement, she slipped out, bundled in her heaviest coat, and made her way cautiously towards the Inuit camp. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She found Lena outside, mending nets, her face etched with the wisdom of the ages. Elizabeth, summoning her courage, approached cautiously. Lena, recognizing the girl, offered a small, knowing smile, devoid of any resentment. She invited Elizabeth inside, where Kaluta, Aiyana's son, was playing with a carved wooden animal. The warmth of the igloo, the scent of burning blubber, and the gentle hum of Lena's work created an unexpected sense of peace. Elizabeth, for the first time, felt a connection, a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding. She stammered out her thanks to Lena, her words inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. Lena simply nodded, her eyes conveying a deeper understanding, a silent promise of friendship that transcended the harsh realities of their worlds. As spring tentatively began to nudge the edges of winter's grasp, a new and more pressing crisis emerged. The caribou herds, essential for the survival of both Inuit and some white settlers, had changed their migration patterns, moving further north than usual. This unprecedented shift, attributed by some to the increasingly unpredictable weather and the growing human presence, spelled potential disaster for everyone. The initial trickle of concern soon became a torrent of fear as food supplies began to dwindle in the small settlement, leading to a palpable desperation that settled over the community like a suffocating blanket. The scarcity ignited existing tensions, with the long-simmering prejudices against the Inuit bubbling fiercely to the surface. Mr. Davies, already deeply resentful of Aiyana, and suspicious of the Inuit presence in general, seized upon the crisis as an opportunity to further his own agenda and solidify his position of authority. He publicly blamed the Inuit for scaring away the herds, fabricating elaborate stories of their reckless hunting practices and a supposed disregard for the delicate balance of the land. His words, though utterly baseless and fueled by his own ignorance and fear, resonated powerfully with some of the desperate settlers, who were all too quick to find a convenient scapegoat for their mounting anxieties and gnawing hunger. The atmosphere in the settlement grew thick and oppressive with animosity as whispers of discontent quickly escalated into overt, ugly hostility. Aiyana's people, facing their own hunger and the dire consequences of the disappearing herds, found themselves increasingly isolated, their traditional hunting territories brazenly encroached upon by desperate white trappers. This led to a series of minor skirmishes and escalating distrust, threatening to erupt into open conflict. Elizabeth, though still recovering from her near-fatal ordeal, overheard her father's venomous pronouncements and felt a profound unease. She witnessed firsthand the raw fear etched on the faces of the settlers, but she also recognized the glaring injustice and blatant falsehoods in her father's accusations. She knew, from her observations and the brief, profound connection at Aiyana's camp, that the Inuit were not just skilled hunters, but were deeply respectful of nature's delicate balance. Her brief, stolen visit to Aiyana's camp had revealed a world of quiet strength, profound wisdom, and a deep, intrinsic connection to the land that her father, in his arrogance, utterly failed to comprehend. She felt a growing, agonizing conflict within her, torn between her ingrained loyalty to her father and the burgeoning understanding of a people unjustly maligned. The storm of prejudice, far more dangerous and destructive than any blizzard, was gathering its full force, threatening to consume both communities in its unforgiving, icy grip. The situation became undeniably critical. The dwindling food stores, the growing unrest, and the biting cold pushed everyone to their limits. The Postmaster, Mr. Davies, driven by sheer desperation and an overwhelming need to reassert his control, announced a large-scale coordinated hunt for the elusive caribou. However, his plan was dangerously flawed, born from a profound lack of understanding of the vast, unforgiving land and the intricate behaviors of the animals they sought. He proposed a perilous route, a path notorious among seasoned locals for its treacherous, unstable ice and countless hidden crevasses, a route that even the most experienced trappers avoided in winter. Many of these trappers, though their bellies ached with hunger, hesitated, their instincts screaming that the risks were far too high. But Mr. Davies, blinded by his own arrogance and an inflexible will, stubbornly refused to listen to their cautious warnings, dismissing them all as mere cowardice and insubordination. Elizabeth, lying awake at night, the silence broken only by the gnawing worry in her heart, knew with a chilling certainty that her father's plan would lead to disaster. She understood the depth of the Inuits' innate understanding of the caribou migration, having seen their quiet wisdom firsthand. Remembering Aiyana's calm authority and his life-saving actions, she felt an overwhelming, desperate need to intervene. Gathering every ounce of her courage, she quietly slipped away from the post office building, the heavy door clicking shut behind her with a sound that seemed deafening in the still night. Under the treacherous cover of a swirling snow flurry, she painstakingly made her way towards Aiyana's distant camp. The wind bit savagely at her exposed skin, piercing through her heaviest coat, but the urgent, life-or-death nature of her mission propelled her forward, banishing the cold and fear. She found Aiyana and Lena inside their igloo, their faces grave as they discussed their own rapidly dwindling food supplies, the silence punctuated by the occasional crackle of the fire. Elizabeth, breathless from her perilous journey, burst out with her father's ill-fated plan, her voice urgent and laced with desperation. She vividly described the proposed route, recounting the terrified trappers' fears and their grave warnings. Aiyana listened intently, his expression growing progressively graver with each of her words. He knew the path Elizabeth described intimately. It was, indeed, a death trap, especially under these specific brutal winter conditions. He looked at Lena, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. They had their own families to protect, their own community to feed. Yet the lives of the settlers, even those who scorned them, were also undeniably at stake. The ancient Inuit law of communal well-being, extending even to those who showed them contempt, weighed heavily on their hearts. Elizabeth, seeing his thoughtful, conflicted gaze, added, "My father won't listen to anyone else, but he might listen to you. If you could just show him a safer path, a way to actually find the herds before it's too late." It was a risky proposition, an appeal to the very man who had denied him gratitude. But in the face of widespread starvation, it was their only fragile hope. Aiyana knew with a heavy heart that approaching Mr. Davies would be fraught with immense peril and likely met with hostility. Yet the haunting images of starving children, both Inuit and white, weighed heavily on his conscience. He understood that the survival of all depended on finding the caribou, and that meant setting aside pride and prejudice. He decided to take the risk, not for the Postmaster's sake, but for the collective survival of everyone in this unforgiving land. With Lena's quiet, unwavering support, her eyes conveying a deep understanding of his burden, and Elizabeth's hesitant but determined presence, Aiyana arrived at the post office. The air inside was thick with palpable tension, a coldness that rivaled the outside temperature. Mr. Davies, visibly taken aback by Elizabeth's unexpected return and the unannounced presence of Aiyana, instantly glowered, his face a hardened mask of suspicion and resentment. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded, his voice sharp and laced with hostility, his eyes darting between his daughter and the Inuit hunter. Elizabeth, summoning every ounce of her newfound conviction, stepped forward, placing herself squarely between her father and Aiyana. "Father," she began, her voice steadying as she continued, "Aiyana knows the land. He knows where the caribou will be, and, more importantly, a safe way to get there. Your plan, it's too dangerous. Many will be lost, perhaps even all of them." Her voice, though trembling ever so slightly with the immense pressure of the moment, carried a surprising authority that silenced even her formidable father for a moment. Aiyana, his gaze steady and unwavering, patiently pointed to a crude map of the region, meticulously drawn by Lena from memory, laid out on a rough wooden table. With deliberate, confident gestures, he traced a different route, explaining in his broken English, supplemented by precise hand movements, the inherent dangers of Mr. Davies's chosen path. He then detailed the safer, more fruitful way to reach the herds, describing the subtleties of wind patterns, the deceptive thickness of the ice, and the almost imperceptible signs of the migrating herds that only generations of observation and intimate knowledge of the land could reveal. Some of the trappers present, who had initially been skeptical of Mr. Davies's original plan, but lacked the courage to defy him, listened with growing interest, their faces etched with desperation and hope, recognizing the undeniable wisdom in Aiyana's words. Mr. Davies, visibly rattled by his daughter's unexpected defiance and confronted with the undeniable, irrefutable logic of Aiyana's profound knowledge, found himself in an impossible, agonizing position. His rigid pride warred fiercely with the desperate, undeniable reality of the situation and the sheer logistical impossibility of his own plan. The murmurs of agreement from his own men, a powerful testament to Aiyana's undisputed expertise, were a final crushing blow to his arrogance. After a long, agonizing silence that stretched taut with unspoken tension, he finally gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," he conceded, his voice grudging and devoid of any warmth. "You lead, but any trouble, any losses, and it's on your head." It was a victory, fragile yet immensely significant, a testament not to a sudden friendship, but to the overwhelming power of shared vulnerability and the desperate, urgent need to bridge a seemingly uncrossable divide for the sake of survival. The hunt proved to be an arduous, brutal test of endurance, pushing the limits of everyone involved, both Inuit and settler. Aiyana, his senses honed by a lifetime in the wilderness, alongside a small, dedicated group of Inuit hunters and a decidedly reluctant Mr. Davies with his few remaining men, led the perilous expedition. True to Elizabeth's conviction, Aiyana's unparalleled knowledge of the land proved utterly invaluable. He navigated treacherous ice fields with an innate sense of direction that defied maps. He read the subtle, shifting signs of the wind to anticipate sudden, blinding blizzards, and ultimately, through sheer perseverance and skill, he led them directly to the elusive caribou herds. The success of the hunt was undeniable and absolute, bringing desperately needed food back to both the Inuit community and the starving white settlement, staving off widespread famine. During the grueling journey, the extreme shared conditions slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to erode the rigid walls of prejudice between the disparate groups. Mr. Davies, stripped of his authority and forced by necessity to rely entirely on Aiyana's expertise, witnessed firsthand the hunter's unwavering resilience, his deep, almost spiritual respect for the land, and his quiet, unyielding leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. He saw Aiyana, without hesitation, share his last precious morsel of dried meat with a struggling, hypothermic settler. He watched Lena, who had also joined the support party, tend to a severely frostbitten trapper with gentle, practiced hands and a quiet, unreserved compassion. Elizabeth, who had insisted on joining the support party, further facilitated this crucial thawing of relations. She translated not just words but intentions. She mediated simmering disputes, and her genuine respect for Aiyana and his people became undeniably clear to her father, forcing him to confront his own biases. Upon their return to the settlement, exhausted but triumphant, a quiet, profound shift had occurred. The immediate relief of a successful hunt was palpable, washing over the weary community, but something far more profound had changed in the air. Mr. Davies, though still a man of few words and deeply ingrained habits, met Aiyana's gaze with a flicker of something akin to genuine respect, a rare warmth in his usually cold eyes. There was no grand apology, no sudden declaration of friendship, no dramatic embrace. Instead, there was a subtle nod, a brief, unspoken acknowledgement of shared survival and mutual reliance. The entire terrifying incident had forced them against their wills to rely on each other, to see beyond superficial differences, effectively breaking down some of the most deeply ingrained prejudices. The harsh Alaskan winter, once a symbol of unyielding division, had ironically, through its very cruelty, forged an unexpected fragile bond between two disparate worlds. The future was still uncertain, and the challenges of this wild land remained, but the seeds of understanding had been sown, promising a glimmer of hope for a future where different cultures could coexist, if not in perfect harmony, then at least with a newfound, grudging respect for their shared humanity. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Alaskan wilderness. If you've been moved by Aiyana and Elizabeth's story, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of human resilience and connection.